welcome to another Lock and Hackle video. And in this episode of Lock and Hackle, we're going to discuss a birthday. And that birthday is the development of what is known as the 3-0-6 or 30 caliber 1906. It is a rifle cartridge that is currently 118 years old, with a caveat that it originally started its life in 1903 with the O3 designation designed by Winchester as the 1903 cartridge, which actually ended up having to pay royalties to what would soon become our competitor on the battlefield, and that is Mauser, which designed the 7x57, which became the 8mm Mauser. So if you look at a 3-0-6 cartridge, and then you look at an 8mm Mauser cartridge, there's not a whole lot of difference. The cases and rims are about the same. Enough of that. Interesting about the the cartridge, the 3-0-6, is the rifle that was designed to shoot the cartridge was the A3-O3, which is the 1903 Springfield, which was again adopted by Mauser. What you see here is my sporterized A3-O3. A lot of people don't like the sporterized versions of military rifles. I actually do, because they are, to me, they are very practical. This particular specimen was done sometime in the 1960s. The roll mark and the serial number, which you can still read, shows this as a 1943 production. I guess they were still making them. This one is actually made by Remington, so it's a Remington A3-O3 that was sporterized. It still has the Springfield stamping on the muzzle. Now, what they really did with this is they enhanced the action a little bit to the Mauser. You have a 2-lug locking bolt at the head with a 3rd locking lug in the rear, with a claw extractor, the Mauser style extractor, which is this right here, the giant control round feed. In other words, when that cartridge comes up, as it's coming upwards before it pops, the rim of the cartridge is sliding into the claw extractor already. So when you eject one, this one's being picked up, and you can literally turn the rifle upside down and the cartridge should not fall out. Originally, the 1903 cartridge fired a 220 grain projectile. They quickly found that the round-nosed heavy bullets were not up to par with what the Germans had developed, the Spitzer round, which is the pointed football-looking projectile. We were still shooting blunt-nosed 220 grain projectiles and not getting near the velocity that Mauser was throwing out there. So in 1906, they dropped the bullet weight to around 150 grains and put a Spitzer bullet in it, such as this, and now they were getting velocities. Now, a lot of your factory ammunition today is actually underloaded to SAMI specifications. One, for safety, they don't want to get sued by people's guns blowing up. But if you are a reloader and you see a myriad of bullets over here to your left, a 3-0-6 is a very fun cartridge to play with. In today's super synthetic plastic fantastic rifles that weigh 4 pounds, and all these PRC cartridges, the 6.8, 6.5s, they're fun, but you're really limited to bullet weights. You're pretty much stuck with what the factories have come up with. You can always download them, but the real beauty of the 30-06 is it can be more than one rifle. Um, there's a thing that's was written by this gentleman here, Robert Ruark, and he wrote a book called Bring Enough Gun. And with the 30-06, you can bring enough gun or bring enough guns with one particular rifle. So seeing that the rifle is the cartridge is 118 years old, over the span of that time period, people have figured out that you can load a 30-06 cartridge anywhere from a 100 grain cartridge all the way up to the big 220 grain. So if you want to download, let's say you want a prairie plucker, you want to go out and shoot coyotes and groundhogs and whatever, you can load some 110 grain, download them a little bit, no recoil. Of course, you'll have to dial in your scope, you'll have to do some test shots to see where you're hitting, and you can do that. Now, let's say you're heading to Alaska and you're going to go after something big. Well, that's where your big cartridges come in, and that is your 220 grain elk, moose, bear. It's a fantastic cartridge it's a do-all, really, and it's a fine piece of American history that we are approaching the 118th year of this cartridge. Now, it's not the oldest military cartridge. That's held by the Russian 7.62x54 because it is still used in service by a lot of their belt-fed machine guns. Yeah, and I think even in Ukraine, we're seeing some of the bolt-action rifles of the day, such as the Mosin Nagant and so on and so forth. The 30-06 was removed from service shortly after the Korean War. We went to the M14, which was the scaled-down version of the, well, a beefed-up version of the M1 Garand and the M1A, and it shot 308, or 7.62x51. These are 7.62x63, I think, is the metric version of this cartridge. So at that point, the 30-06 was removed from military service. It quickly became the cartridge of choice for big game hunters. It's said that in Theodore Roosevelt, after his presidency and his pressure to have the United States build a bolt-action rifle that fired a Mauser-like cartridge, because after his battle in Cuba in the Spanish-American War with Spanish Mausers against 45-70s, yeah, they were getting shot up pretty bad. So when the A3-O3 Springfield was being produced, and then they adopted the 30-06 cartridge in 1906, sometime in 1909, 1910, Roosevelt went to Africa with a military rifle. He took an A3-03 to Africa. And in his book, African Game Trails, it talks about he's taking, I want to say, what you would call artillery shots at beasts out to 400 yards with open sights. Okay. And then the author, Robert Ruark, who wrote Bring Enough Rifle, he had like 404 Jeffries and a 30-06. Ernest Hemingway is touted as writing about having his sporterized A3-03 Springfield rifle taken to Africa. At this point, he did have a scope on it, archaic as it is, probably worse than this. This is an original Weaver K4 scope that is on here. It's correct for the time period that this rifle was sporterized. So the 30-06, it may be considered, the fuddiest of fuddy cartridges out there. The 308 still has kind of a following amongst a lot of military style shooters, long distance. Along, the 270 is obviously known as the Plains game rifle. It's the gun that Jack O'Connor, he may or may not have used the 30-06, the 06, or possibly the 03 cartridge to develop the 270, but in all, the 270 spawned from the 30-06. And there's really, if you start looking at some of the numbers that you can put up with the 30-06 and what you can put up with the 270, it seemed like he just wanted to, he turned a Volkswagen into a Porsche. For back in the day, the two weren't too dissimilar. Now they are very much so, very dissimilar from each other. Really good book. If you can find a copy of this book, Jack O'Connor's the rifle book, it still plays out today in setting up your rifle, the shooting, and all that. For me, I like the intrinsic value of the historic part of the 30-06 and its footprint on the landscape of the American sportsman. When people were out hunting with the 30-30 primarily, shooting, at distances up to 100 yards and sometimes even further, just unloading the rifle as quick as they can, when a very flat shooting, high pressure 150 grain bullet could now reach out to, with scopes at the time in the 1940s, 1950s, you could easily shoot out to 250 yards. Or you could take that 100-yard shot with one shot, not recycling the lever on your 30-30 6 times trying to hit that deer. Now you could buy one box of shells, and that could last you almost 5 years if you were good enough, depending on where you lived and the quota of deer that you could take. There are stories where people have bought a box of ammunition, their rifle holds true, and they go out once a year, they take a buck or a doe, they might shoot 3 rounds to sight it in and make sure it stays within a minute of deer, and use that box for several years, that box of ammunition for several years before they have to buy a new box. Now, as a hobbyist reloader, I like to play with the different bullet weights that are available. I like to make up loads out of this book and tinker with them. I have found that this particular rifle, I've made several recipes of 180 grain, 178 match, 165, 150, and 110. And the 110 grains were actually a lot of fun to shoot, and they were pretty accurate. They shot high, which is par for the course. It's a lighter bullet, it's traveling a little bit faster. But I found that this particular rifle really liked the 165 grain soft point boat tail cartridge, or bullet, which is that one right there. So that's probably going to be my new hunting cartridge for this particular rifle. So the cartridge being 118 years old, and this rifle manufactured in this A3-O3 by Remington was made in 1943, and sometime 10 to 20 years after that was turned into this beautiful rifle right here. We're looking at 70 75 to 78 years that this particular rifle has been in use. I don't know what it was prior to being a civilian rifle, what its days were in the military. I have no idea. But I think we can appreciate that we have a sportsman's cartridge. Aside from the 30-30, which is actually quite older because it stems back to 1894, but it originally started its life with the 45-70, and yes or no, whether or not the 30-30 started life as a black powder or it was the first cased cartridge to be introduced with smokeless powder. Fun guns to shoot, really good to handle, lightweight, but the 30-30 just doesn't give you what the 30-06 can give you in something like this. It's almost space age between the 30-30 and the 30-06. It was a short time period, a short gap in evolution, but the leap forward was 1,000 times, because you now, everybody who owned a bolt action rifle for hunting, now they were stepping into a new arena as a hunter. They were able to, with a nice pair of binoculars, maybe the remnants of scopes, the prevalence of scopes that were coming out, you could become more selective on your game. And then you could, play with, if you were savvy enough, you could play with different bullet weights. A lot of times, reloading really didn't take off until about the 1950s. After World War II, and sportsmen's they were building Wildcat cartridges, like the 280 Ackley Improved, the 22-250, stuff like that. And a lot of that stems from this cartridge, because you had a case big enough, you could cut it down, you could neck it smaller, you could trim it back. There's so much you could do with the 30-06 that we now have several cartridges out there because of this. This is the 30-30 would be like the great-great-grandfather of American sportsmanship in hunting, but the 30-06 is kind of like the grandpa. It's the guy that he's got the grizzly hands. He's been there, done that, and he can still do it. So if you're ever out and about and you're thinking about getting a new hunting rifle, or maybe getting into reloading, or maybe you have a 30-06, a simple reloading kit would not be very expensive, and there's so much you can do. You only need about 3 different types of powder, and bullet selection is crazy, and you can really have fun. And if you have kids, you can load the 110 grain, load them light, and now you can do some target shooting, you can do some varmint shooting, you could even really download them, and you could take rabbits with them if you really wanted to, especially with the 100 grain. It's just an amazing platform to be able to have fun with. It is a great historical aspect of our country, from wartime development to ex-presidents and famous writers taking these firearms to Africa and then being carried out from the 4 corners of the United States. Africa, Texas, Nevada, Wyoming, anywhere you want to go, you can find. And that's one reason I really like the 30-06, to round this out, is it is a cartridge that if you were going out anywhere in, say, anywhere within the continental United States, to include probably even Hawaii, if for some reason you lost a box of shells, you could walk into any sporting goods store, sometimes a hardware store, sometimes a gas station, and you'll probably find 30-06, 308, 270, and 3030. Just because those particular cartridges are so prevalent. You would probably find 30-06 first, then maybe 270, 308, and obviously there's going to be some loose boxes of 3030, but you're going to find it. Now, even in Africa, the two most common plains game cartridges, I'm not saying dangerous game, not the Black Death, Cape Buffalo, lion, elephant, rhino, stuff like that. But your plains game like kudu, Grant's gazelle, wildebeest, the 7x57 Mauser, and the 30-06 are still widely used in Africa for simple plains game hunting, for the simple fact that it's been around for so long and it does the job. Anywhere from 165 grain up to 180 grain cartridges, out to 250, 300 yards for some of your bigger African animals. So I just want to say, as we are June is about the time that this cartridge was adopted in 1906. So hence the reason I'm doing this video. It's kind of the birthday or the anniversary of the 30-06. It really, will the 30-06 ever be replaced? Well, I think it has been. It's been replaced by so many other cartridges that have come out because of its development, but yet it's still here. The 6.5 Creedmoor, the PR 7mm PRCs, all those cartridges come because people dabbled with the 30-06 cartridge over the last 100 years. People like the shorter cartridges because you can get a shorter action, which makes the rifle a little bit lighter, and your bolt movement is shorter versus a full length bolt action. Yeah, the 30-06. So happy birthday or happy anniversary to the old warhorse.